Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you. If I occasionally mute myself to cough like a maniac, it's just because I have to cough like a maniac.
Excellent stuff. And of course, Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you, sir?
How's it going, guys?
Yeah, all good. Right, so I just want to start off with a very brief news story that's good. We're seeing very terrible devastation in KZN from the floods. Stuff is still coming out about that. There's been still some instability. Our former colleague, Sihle, Big Daddy Liberty, told us that there was apparently some looting close to where he lives in Umlazi last night, so that's not great. But anyway, we hope that people are managing to get by in all the chaos. However, there is some good news. A bunch of crocodiles were washed out of a farm and were on the loose for a little bit of time, but it appears they've all been captured. So the people of KZN are not going to have to put up with crocodiles on top of the flood damage. Thank goodness, because that's the last thing that KwaZulu-Natal needed was rampaging loose crocodiles. So yeah, that's good news. It looks like they've all been caught. So let's start off with our first story of today, and that is about South Africa has made a top 10. And you think, wow, that's good news. And you think, well, unfortunately, it's a top 10 worst mining destinations in the world. So, of course, South Africa, as an investment destination, is known in many ways for being one of the world's greatest treasure troves of minerals. We have so much stuff here, everything from coal to gold to platinum to diamonds. There's an enormous amount of stuff in SA, and yet our mining industry has been steadily shrinking for the past decade at least. Very few online new projects are coming in. The government just released its new exploration strategy for how it says it's going to increase mining exploration across the country. It took 2 years to produce, and according to someone I talked to, it basically looks like an unpaid intern did it over a weekend. It's 12 pages long, and it's really not up to much. And it's filled with sort of like, shifting paradigms. We must align with our strategic, kind of buzzwords just to fill it out. So that's good, and that perhaps explains why we've gotten into this low ranking. So this ranking is done by the Fraser Institute, which does an annual survey of mining companies, which measures the investment attractiveness of various mining jurisdictions. South Africa has ranked 10th last, so there's still 9 countries ahead of us, which is good. And it was out of, I think, 85 countries in total were surveyed. So not great, especially when you consider the enormous number of resources that we have here. We really should be doing much better as a destination. Countries, I think there are countries in Africa which are ahead of us, and they really shouldn't be, considering that we're supposed to be Africa's most attractive investment destination. So, Herman, let me start with you. How did we get here, and how did we get out of it?
Well, one of the first things that I noted from this story was the quote from the Minerals Council CEO, Roger Baxter. This is a deeply disappointing reflection of the state of mining in South Africa. I mean, no shit, Sherlock. It is worrying that the trend remains downwards rather than stabilizing or improving. We must revitalize our efforts to address the underlying challenges informing this trend. What a vacuous nonsense. He could have farted with more insight. And then you look at the next paragraph. The council is working closely with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy and other departments to address the many challenges mining companies are facing. But we are not gaining the traction or urgency we'd like to see in resolving these challenges, Baxter said. Again, wow, welcome to the party. This is something that entities like the IRR have been saying for almost 2 decades. The mining sector in South Africa is an example of how not to do corporate governance and how not to do government relations if you are a corporate entity. Because the idea was that if you keep, cordial relationships with the government and you have, quote, a seat at the table, you can influence the policies of government to be more serving to your commercial interests. The problem is, however, that most business people and most corporate leaders in South Africa don't really understand that they are dealing with ideological fanatics. A business person at the end of the day is almost definitively pragmatic. You try to maximize your profit, and that's about it. That is about it. And you can pad your public pitch with social consciousness and environmental awareness and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the corporate leader looks at his bottom line and needs to be a pragmatist about what works. And the idea that most corporate leaders have going into discussions with government is that governments are similar, that politicians occupy a similar sort of mind space where it's how can we make things work? Now, that might have been true with the government of national unity, the last few years of the Mandela ANC government, even to some degree during the Mbeki era. But ever since the re-establishment of the communist left-wing faction, the far left faction, the one that catapulted Zuma into the presidency, ever since they regained control of the policy levers at Polokwane in 2007, the government has essentially been a bunch of ideologues. And an ideologue is often anything but pragmatic. So a seat at the table is really just a seat at your own post-mortem if you're a mining company in South Africa. If we look to what the capacity is for mining in South Africa, we used to be historically up there with your great mining economies, Russia, Australia, South American countries, Canada. Now we are in the 10th worst position, and nothing has fundamentally changed other than policy. The ground and the mineral richness under South Africa is the same as it's been for a few million years. The problems are, as it were, government made. Productivity is too high risk. Hiring and firing, too high risk. You can't gain investment because you've got nonsense like BEE determining whether you can actually have ownership of the company you invest in. You've got problems with regards to the hanging threat of the destruction of property rights. You've got the Agri-SA judgment. You've got the environmental legislation that declares almost all natural resources to be the property of the state. On top of that, you have the fact that the power and infrastructure that you are dependent on to mine anything from below the crust of the earth is just in a position about as stable as Andile Mngxitama. So all of this cumulates in making South Africa, by no fault other than the government and the accomplices of corporate South Africa who thought that they could negotiate with a tiger while their head was in its mouth, makes them look utterly stupid. So when Mr. Baxter comes with these lamentations of, oh, so bad, very disappointing, but we are working closely with the government, and perhaps he should take a step back and realizing that it is because they are working closely with the government rather than blatantly opposing the government on nonsense policies that they are in this situation, up some creek without a paddle.
So I think it's worth talking a little bit about, what's so good about mining anyway. Mining as an industry has been under a very heavy attack, and in some cases for good reasons, right? If you don't do mining correctly, say, for example, you just let companies sort of strip mine the land, you can cause quite a lot of environmental damage. And of course, there are many memories, I think, in South Africa of times when mines used to be quite dangerous, when a lot of people would die in mining accidents. But mining is not really that industry anymore. The bigger corporations have much better safety records. And as long as, you don't have corrupt officials letting them get away with stuff, as long as you have at least a couple of basic sensible environmental things, you can actually mitigate an enormous amount of environmental damage. The amount of money to be made in mining is such that companies can often afford to repair the land basically after they've done with a mine. And of course, mining, despite the fact that it's shrunk to this relatively insignificant part of our economy over the past couple of years, it's still been helping to keep government afloat with all of the money it's making currently out of the commodity prices boom. And of course, for ordinary people, it's an industry you can often get into. You don't need like a university degree all the time to get a job in mining, and the jobs often pay quite well. They pay better than, for example, construction. Mining's probably tougher work than construction because, you have to go down into the mine and all that. but at the same time, you can earn more money that way. And currently, it's a much better place. I think a lot more attractive jobs than a lot of other things. Sorry, Hermann, you want to say something?
Yes. I just see dear old Whiskey Jack in the comment section again disagreeing out of principle. I mean, we can say the sky is blue and he'd have a problem with it. But his comment is, what is the alternative? Make angry podcasts. They have skin in the game, meaning not having a seat, and opposing comes with consequences. Yes, because the IRR only produces a podcast. Good job. But beyond that, if you want to understand a sector that is successful in South Africa, you can do much worse than agriculture. Agriculture actually was treated very, very antagonistically by the new ANC government in the after 1994, and were denied a seat at the table. What that did to the entire sector was to make it understand that were it to survive at all, it can't rely on government support and government subsidies and government sort of policies being favorable. It had to actually get to work and make itself a commercially and financially viable industry. So if you think sitting at the table is actually, the way you make a successful government, if you share the space you have with mad ideologue socialists and the NDR, then I'm afraid you haven't been paying much attention.
So, Marius, one of the things I want to get to here, I just want your thoughts generally on this, but also one of the things I wanted to get your thoughts on was Greta montage is, of course, the Minister of Mining and Energy. He looks like he's having a bit of a rough time. He's being attacked by the left for being in favor of coal and staying on fossil fuels. He's being attacked by the right for his anti-business stuff. He ran afoul even of the president because he apparently had opposed the increase in the generation capacity, which is one of the best things that the Ramaphosa presidency has actually done, is lift this cap on what mines, for example, are allowed to produce in terms of energy for themselves. And he was on the wrong side of that debate as far as we're concerned. Now this is not great for his portfolio. Do you think Greta is in any sort of political trouble, or do you think he's going to sail through this?
No, I'm pretty sure he'll sail through it. He's a Ramaphosa man, so I'm pretty sure he's going to, he might get shifted out the portfolio. But, he's a strange guy. Like, sometimes he says things that are pretty sensible, and then he also says things that are pretty crazy. And just to show everybody here, we don't have a hive mind here at the RR at the Daily Friend. I'm going to disagree with Hermann. And I do think it's much easier, and I actually agree with Whiskey Jack for once. I do think our job is to criticize the government and say, this is what's going wrong. And we don't live in a dictatorship. There are not really many consequences if we go say, Sir Ramaphosa is he's a moron. He got his brain at the toilet store or whatever the case is, but I do think somebody who's running a mine, somebody who's running a mine or a big mining company, they rely a lot on the government to give them permissions. The government's there have been tales of where a mine has done something to piss the government off. Then a safety inspector rocks up and says, no, look, even though there has been an accident at the mine for 3 years or something, he says, no, this is too dangerous. I'm shutting this mine down.
The fire extinguisher in this area is expired. Therefore, we're going to close the mine for 2 weeks.
It's 1 day after its inspection or whatever. You've missed by 1 day. So I'm going to close this mine down for 2 months and we're going to check everything. So it's, I do think that the mining companies, mining executives, people like Roger Baxter do have to tiptoe around some of these issues. And we don't know what's being said behind closed doors. I know that I do think behind closed doors there is something different. And at the same time, a lot of these mining companies have voted with their feet. I just looked at Goldfields now. Goldfields was started by Cecil John Rhodes in the 1880s or something. It's got 1 mine in South Africa, 4 in Australia, 2 in Ghana. Anglo-Americans the same. Anglo-American has said they are not going to do any more greenfields projects in South Africa. They're going to maintain the mines they have here, and that's it. We've seen Neil Froneman at Sibanye do the same thing. They're going to maintain the mines they have here, no greenfield stuff. And Neil Froneman has not been a shrinking violet. He said this government is terrible, and we're on the way to becoming a failed state.
So I was actually gonna side I think with Hermann on this one, which is that Neil Froneman is a great example of what a mining executive can do without getting punished for it. I definitely agree. Government does not play nice. When you when you go against the agenda, you can be in a lot of trouble. So I do get it that perhaps going 2 shotgun barrels full is not always wise or easy. But I do think that Neil Froneman has shown, and he knew this was the case, and he's built up his business in such a way so that he could resist it. But anyway, we've gone, I think, long on this topic.
So I think it's from two sides. I think maybe mining executives can be a bit more frank, but I also think there's also an issue with the government, which is inherently anti or opposed to the free market. And I think there's some pragmatists in the government who aren't. But I think overall it is an ideological government.
Absolutely. I'm not saying that every time a minister, a mining executive sees a minister, they should punch them. But Neil Froneman,
that would be pretty funny, though.
Yes, Neil Froneman is exactly the type of sort of just pragmatic backbone you can show, because no one can argue that he's been a commercial disaster merely by standing up for rational policies without sucking up to the government. And there is immense power in what corporates governance can actually accomplish. It was in 2008. It was I can't remember the guy's name, but it was the ABSA chief of their land asset division. So an important guy in the company that essentially for up to 10 years scared the government off going after land rights and property rights, because he essentially made the case that the IR has been making over the last 2 years few years with the resurgence of EWC as an issue, that it will blow a massive multi-trillion rand hole in the banking sector. So I'm not saying that you have to be actively antagonistic, but you can be uncompromising about the consequences of awful policies. And if pragmatism at the seat of the table was the solution for this industry, my goodness, then we wouldn't be in the bottom 10 of this group. Whatever the mining sector has been trying for the last 10 years, clearly hasn't worked. And to dearest Whiskey Jack, if you think Agri-SA speaks for the agricultural sector in South Africa, you've got another thing coming. They were the ones willing to a few years ago say, expropriate property, but just not the commercial farms, the smaller, family farms. Go ahead, take them. So if you think Agri-SA is somehow representative of the mining sector or the agricultural sector, then I would suggest you get out a bit more and perhaps watch a bit less Daily Friend. But there are very few circumstances in which I'd encourage that.
So before this turns into too much of a cage match, this kind of image I have in mind when you said of mining executives punching ministers kind of brings to mind an idea of resolving policy disputes by having fist fights in an arena between people in suits, which does rather tickle me pink. But anyway, let's move on to our next story because we've gone long on this one. I don't think there's much to say on this one, except it's quite amusing. Andile Mngxitama, who once upon a time was in many ways the intellectual force in the EFF. He was kind of one of their ideas guys, their ideologues. He, of course, ran afoul of the party leadership there. It seems like he tried to challenge Julius Malema for control of the party, and he lost. And ever since, he's kind of been drifting about. He's now, I think, still the leader of the Black First, Land First party, which continues to operate, but doesn't seem to have made any kind of electoral breakthroughs anywhere in the country, as far as I can tell. And now he's sitting on Twitter tweeting the following. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it basically he basically says, and this is a quote from Andile Mngxitama: "Dear Blacks, it's a technology of mass destruction called HAARP." He's referring, of course, to the floods in KZN. "They can control the weather. VUCA." And then he says, slightly derogatory term for black people at the end. So Andile Mngxitama wants a great sort of, I think, potential political voice on the national stage. Not great in the sense that he's good, but great in the sense that he may have been influential, has been reduced to tweeting about how Americans control the weather. Marius, how did it all go so wrong?
Yeah, it's actually quite sad. I remember reading Andile Mngxitama stuff back in the noughties. When he used to write a lot in the Mail and Guardian before the Mail and Guardian went the way it's gone. And, I never agreed with it because it always came from a kind of a black nationalist, maybe black consciousness position. So I never really agreed with the stuff, but it made you think, he was a guy who could, he was quite articulate. He made you consider perspectives different from your own and that generally come across. And I don't know what's happened to the guy. I think it often happens to people when they take a certain position. They call the grifters a lot. They take a certain position, and to keep themselves in the public eye, they've got to say crazier and crazier things. And I think that's kind of what's happened with Paul Andile. I mean, and he was actually quite a big critic of Julius Malema. He only joined the EFF, I think. While Julius Malema was in the youth league, he was a heavy critic of it. He was part of something called the Samteba National Imbizo, which was a big critic of the youth league and Julius Malema. But then obviously when Malema split, I think in 2013, then Andile became a member of the party and obviously an MP. So, but yeah, the guy's gone, I mean, now with Black First, Land First, I mean, some of the things they say are probably too extreme even for, the EFF. And, they've got some really crazy people in there. There's one guy, his surname's is Marsdorp. I can't remember if it's Leslie or Lindsay's his first name.
Lindsay.
Because Leslie Marsdorp is a businessman, so I don't want to confuse the two. But yeah, so I mean, I think the guy's just gone a bit crazy. I don't know. I don't want to cast aspersions on the guy, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some substances involved there, whether they're legal or not. And I've seen some recent photos of the guy. He's not looking particularly healthy. So I think, there's a lot of stuff going on with the guy. And it's, and also I don't think if the American government is controlling our weather, I don't think they really care too much about what's happening on the east coast of South Africa. If they are going to be doing anything funny, it'll be in Central Europe or Afghanistan or, with Ukraine or in Afghanistan or something like that. So I'm pretty sure, I doubt President Biden or his predecessor, President Trump, could even tell you where KwaZulu-Natal is, actually.
Herman, very briefly on this before we move on.
Yeah, I just want to know who spoke up. I mean, this
who leaked this important information?
Yeah, who leaked this? I understood it to be part of the global white WhatsApp group club. Who spoke up? Somewhere. That, just who blabbed? Stop blabbing.
Oh dear. Anyway, unfortunately, this tweet managed to get 2,200 likes. So I don't think that's in any way representative of the country because Twitter isn't, but it may be perhaps as representative of a particular slice of Twitter. And man, that's kind of depressing. Okay, let's move on to our next topic and something a little bit more serious. We covered a little bit on the show about this dispute in the city of Johannesburg between the coalition partners. ActionSA was keen on making the acting city manager, a guy called Floyd Brink, the permanent city manager. And the DA and some of the other coalition parties, I think also the Freedom Front Plus and stuff, were not super keen on this. They wanted a different guy. They said that Floyd Brink was tied to the EFF and corruption. ActionSA said that, by kind of putting this guy in, it would be very good for cooperation with the EFF, and they need to get over this ideological objection to the EFF because without them, coalitions can't work. Well, there's been a new interesting turn in this. So when Hermann Mashaba was made mayor of Johannesburg back in 2016, he appointed, I think it was at the time, he was formerly of the Gauteng police commissioner who had been fired by government, Shadrach Shabir, as a special investigative guy to track down corruption in the city of Johannesburg. Now, Shadrach Shabir is still there. And apparently he was looking into Floyd Brink's office because there were allegations of corruption there. Well, Floyd Brink said, well, actually, no, I'm going to curtail all of your investigative powers because I've just discovered that you don't have proper security clearance. Looks like trouble is brewing on the horizon for Floyd Brink, and I suspect this is going to cause some difficulties for ActionSA because here's the guy they appointed to bust corruption, or at least their leader appointed to bust corruption, fighting with the guy they want to be the city manager. Herman, what do you make of this?
So I think there are a few dramatis personae here. You've got Floyd Brink, you've got Shadrach Sibia, and then you've also got a guy called Johan Mettler. Now, since 2000, I think it's since 2001 at least, or perhaps a bit longer, Floyd Brink has been acting city manager in Johannesburg, and there's now this process to appoint a permanent city manager. And Brink is one of the final candidates. I can't remember the third one, but the other one is Johan Mettler. And the DA leadership in Johannesburg want Mettler. Mettler is someone of some high repute. He was appointed city manager under the mayoralty of Athol Trollip in Nelson Mandela Bay, largely credited with making some turnarounds that the coalition government there could achieve possible, because a city manager essentially manages the COO sort
Right.
of
I just want
function.
to reiterate this: the city manager is basically the most important official in the entire city. If you have a bad city manager, you're going to have a bad city, and vice versa.
Yes. So Metler has also been used by Pravin Gordhan and Tito Mboweni as sort of a fixer when local municipalities are collapsing. They send in Johan Metler, and he usually gets things to a pretty decent state before it is further screwed up by politicians who then regain power after the national government intervention. There are also some rumors from inside the DEA that the city of Cape Town is eyeing Metler for appointment of some kind, and also from what I hear, national government is also interested in hiring Mr. Metler for a key portfolio department position. So you've got Floyd Brink versus Johan Metler. Now, Brink was brought in 2016, and there are suspicions that he was brought in because of a quid pro quo deal with the EFF to, tacitly support the then mayor.
He's been accused
Hermann
of helping the EFF members or people who became the EFF to enrich themselves in Limpopo back when they're part of the ANC Youth League, I believe.
Yes, and he was arrested.
Proven, but that is the allegation.
Yes, and he was arrested alongside people like Julius Malema's cousin in a 2013 arrest operation. He was acquitted later, that must be said. But since, he has become quite a controversial figure, especially with regards to the procurement of CCTV and security devices for the city of Johannesburg, where an independent report found him to have acted in a manner similar to gross dereliction of duty is the exact description, gross dereliction of duty. And you also sit in a situation where the report encouraged the Johannesburg Council to take punishing steps or sanctioning steps against Brink. Another interesting twist on this is then, of course, Shadrach Sibiya, who is investigating the situation here. And one has to ask, what exactly is going on with ActionSA? The great allegation, while they don't want to support Johan Metler's appointment, the great allegation against him is that he had lunch with Mpoma Latse, the now mayor of Johannesburg, prior to him being considered a candidate for the city manager position. That is the most substantive accusation against his integrity. Yet ActionSA is looking at Floyd Brink with his baggage and Johan Metler with his lunch, and thinking that the public will somehow buy the argument that Brink is the lesser tainted character. You should also perhaps consider what the timing of some coalition ActionSA shenanigans are. At the same time when the Floyd Brink Johan Metler appointment was heating up, ActionSA was over in Tshwane making some brouhaha about the passing of the budget. If it's coincidence, it's a very, very lucky coincidence. But if it's political strategy, it's somewhat ingenious political strategy to divert attention away from ActionSA's association with Floyd Brink. But I hear that with the firing of Sibiya, Brink might have now actually gone too far. And it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens from this. And voters, especially ActionSA voters, should demand answers from their party and its leader as to why they are willing to so freely associate with a guy with an unhealthy penchant for dressing like a Prohibition-era gangster and behaving like one.
Marius, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to follow that, but I mean, there's something. ActionSA, they obviously say that they are against corruption and stuff, but I think I don't think Mashab himself is corrupt at all. But while he was mayor of Joburg, I do think he let some things happen on his watch, or he turned a blind eye to it, certainly. And he seems to have a weird affinity for the EFF, even though on paper the ActionSA and EFF have very different ideological viewpoints, things like non-racialism, the free market, and so on. So it's it's an interesting thing, and I'm not too sure what ActionSA is playing at here. But I think what we've seen happen in Tshwane and Joburg, it's clear that you can have a stable coalition without the EFF in both those municipalities. Ekurhuleni is a different story, but in both Joburg.
Well,
and
I don't know if I'd say in Tshwane.
Okay, you can have a 50% plus one coalition without the EFF. Let's put it that. Maybe not a stable coalition, which is what exists in Joburg at the moment and in Tshwane. But we've also seen, even though there's a fairly stable coalition in Tshwane, I think there's only about 6 parties involved there. ActionSA and the DA have still been in each other's throats, and there's a big by-election coming up next month where DA councillors defected from the DA to ActionSA. And yeah, I think that's going to be a very interesting election to watch, see what happens. The ActionSA only got about 6% of the votes in that ward last year. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do in this election, if they can increase that support or maybe even change the DA there.
One of the things to note about by-elections is the turnout usually is lower than in the national election. And as a result, the side with the more motivated voters can often win a seat that they might not otherwise in a normal election be able to win. So
But
that's why
I see the DA and ActionSA, they've both been throwing, I mean, John Steenhuisen was out there recently. So they've both been throwing the big guns at that by-election. So
no, exactly. And I think that's because of that, because both of them realize that it's very important to defining the future. But anyway, we don't have a lot of time left, so I just want to close off. I just want to say thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the show. I do want to give you one piece of news which I have seen online, which is no doubt going to cause many think pieces to be written, and that is that apparently Elon Musk has now decided that he's going to put in an offer to buy the whole of Twitter. We'll see if that actually goes through. But there's going to be some fun to be had if that happens, because a lot of people are going to be very happy and a lot of people are going to be very upset if that happens. But anyway, and yeah, to everyone celebrating Easter, happy Easter. And we will see you next week, Tuesday, for the Daily Friends Show. Have a wonderful long weekend. Cheers, everyone.